The Autism Research Institute relies on the generosity of donors like you to make this webcast possible. If you enjoy this presentation, please consider making a donation. Thank you.
Now, before we get started, I'll introduce our speaker. Psychologist, lecturer, and author Dr. Wenn Lawson has run his own business for 22 years. He was misdiagnosed for decades until finally at age 42, he was diagnosed with an autism spectrum disorder, ADHD, dyspraxia, and learning difficulties. Today, Dr. Lawson is a teaching fellow with Birmingham University's online Master's Autism course. He resides on the Autism Open Access board and the board for SEAL, a community college in Australia. He's also on the ICAN board of Southwest Australia and is a participant and advisor for Autism CRC Australia. He has written numerous books and papers on autism. You may type your questions now and throughout the talk. He'll answer as many as possible at the end. These webinars are made possible through generous donor support, including a grant from Local 25 Boston Teamsters. If you'd like to contribute, please visit our website at autism.com. And now I will turn this over to Dr. Lawson.
Thank you. It really is a privilege to be able to share this with you. On the screen, I think you should be seeing some images that I put on the first slide here. On one side, you'll see a black and white photo. This is myself with my two sisters. For me, it's interesting looking back through those photos and seeing and remembering that I was dressed in shorts or trousers as opposed to dresses growing up. I never liked school uniforms, which we had to wear when I was growing up, which were dresses. And eventually I was actually allowed to wear a pair of jeans, which was really unusual at that time, but it was mostly because I had a leg that had a caliper on due to disease. Anyway, on this picture with myself in the blue shirt and the tall man next to me, that's my brother. I'll never get to be as tall as him because I was I was assigned female at birth. And that meant different hormones were racing around my body, and that impacted on things like how tall I am. He's also on the autistic spectrum and fully recognizes me as his brother. He's nearly 10 years older than me, so it's okay. He calls me his little brother. The picture with myself and Temple in my female form, I always love, not just because I value Temple's friendship, but because she made a comment on my tie and said that I looked smart. So that was really nice. Pictures underneath these, the picture of me as grandpa with my two granddaughters. They are nearly 11 and 9, both on the autism spectrum. And then there's one standing next to my mom. When I was 30, again in my female form, there's one with me feeding a magpie, an Australian magpie, not related to European magpies at all. She comes to visit. We've been feeding her since she was a baby, and her parents kind of abandoned her a bit because her wings weren't quite right, which is very symbolic because so many of us as humans don't fit stereotypical pictures of what you're supposed to look like, what you're supposed to do as people. And so there's sort of, she's very autistic. She taps on the window each morning for her food and chats away. So there's a lot of autistic people in these slides, moving right along. I've put this one on here because even though it says what to expect in this presentation, I promise not to talk about Star Wars, except for just mentioning it this one time. But in autism, we often have people will call them obsessions, and I think that's a bit of a put down. They're really more like passions, and I have a bit of a passion for science fiction, especially Star Wars, and so that's why these images are intermixed. Images of people in one gender presenting with both genders and so on, as well as the science fiction things. We're not science fiction anymore. As autistic people, we're very real. As autistic people living with gender differences, that's a very real thing. And sometimes our autism impacts on the way people see us, and they tend to think, possibly, is this a special interest? It might be, and there are ways that we can work through to try and tell. But as autistic people, we're pretty in tune with what's going on with our, even if we don't have words for it, with our sense of discomfort. And if we say, this doesn't feel right, it probably doesn't. I want to read you a poem. I use poetry as a way of connecting my thoughts and ideas. I put them on paper, then I can revisit them to help me make sense of what I'm feeling. This is called Who Am I? When looking out upon the world, I see, as any might, the things I notice, boy or girl, are captured within my sight. When looking out upon the world, I feel, as any might. My heart can hurt, ache or break, my senses heightened, set or curled, I live through day and night. But as you look in upon my world, your head might judge, your eyes not see, the true reality that makes up me. Flesh and bone, a body image, may not make the man. The clothes I wear may cause a stare, my choices may confuse. But what if she is not, I am? What if he is not a man? The binary world, this binary world imposed, is set by those who propose male and female is set in time, when reality says there's not one line. So autism is not one thing, gender is not one thing. In the world of autism, as clinicians, we know that there are many characteristics that form the autism assessment, but when we look at a person, their character, their personality, the way they're socialized, all these things impact, and autism presents differently through different lenses. What it will mean for all of us on the spectrum, wherever we are, whether that's people who are who don't use language typically, whether that's people who are very verbal, the one thing that will kind of stand out from research and from experience is that we're very single-minded, and that single-mindedness means we focus on things that are of interest to us. We don't just focus on every detail. You know, you'll read about that we're detailed focused, but it's not any detail. It's details we're interested in. But that means separating things like social, public, private can be very difficult because it's hard for us to separate the wider aspects that let us know they are different. If you're typically developing, neurologically typically developing, we sometimes call you NT, you're kind of working from the light of a wider beam of a torch. We operate from that very narrow beam. This means you have access to the wider circumstances, context of a variety of different things that I may miss. So separating and telling the differences can be difficult for us. But just because it's difficult, it doesn't mean they're totally out of reach. It just means you've got to get there a different route. In autism, we may not notice other or be aware of public and private as different, not notice when some behaviors are encouraged or discouraged. Our attention might be elsewhere focused. So what is of interest to me will take over all of my attention. Now, that's not always a special interest that I have. When I think of little people on the spectrum, we tend to think of cartoons, Thomas the Tank Engine stories. As we get a bit older, it might be video games. In females, it might be books, animals. It might be fashion. It might be a social interest. It might be board games, chess, these sorts of things. Whatever it is, that's what we think of as a sort of separate special interest that becomes a passion. But also things that take over our interest are things we're experiencing. That might be hunger, pain. It might be something's upset us and we're still trying to work it out. It might be a conversation we had a few moments or months ago that's taking over, and we ruminate It goes round and round in our heads. But wherever our attention is, it will mean we're not necessarily able to bring more things into that circle of what we notice of attention. So what I'm attending to takes over and will knock out other things, which will be hard to look at somebody and listen. We do one or the other. I've learned to look in people's general direction, towards their foreheads, maybe around their mouths. But if I'm listening to somebody, I really look at them because I want to take in what I'm hearing. And looking will actually interfere with that. So in a social world, people think and believe we're interested in them when we look at them. Teachers think we're listening to them when we look at them. And if therefore they're working with a student who's not looking, they think that we're being rude or difficult. And people will sometimes focus in on trying to get us to look, not realizing that our autism will mean how hard this can be. So we need to consider these things when we're supporting people, very much so. None of us are great at accepting difference. Autistic people find accepting change and things they're not used to incredibly hard. But if you're an NT person, you will notice more of the big picture. So for you, as an NT person, change it might be uncomfortable, sure, but at least you can kind of avert to other understandings. So if the local store closes, you think, okay, where's the next one? If the bus doesn't come, when will the next one be here? Or maybe I can phone a taxi or a friend, get there a different way, I'm on my way to somewhere. These are part of understandings from a wider perspective of the world that, as autistic people, we often miss. But maybe because we notice less of the bigger picture, we can sometimes be more fluid in our gender understanding. That means people have a very cultural concept of male and of female, and this goes with that sort of thing. But if you don't know that this goes with that, maybe in some ways you're more open to integrity and honesty, and you connect to the real things that are important to you rather than being so influenced by those social forces, the advertising. On the other hand, if you're really single focused in that respect with what you notice on television, you will be very influenced. I can think of a young man who saw an advert for cheaper phone contact or something. Anyway, it said, ring this number, it's free. So he rang them and he booked in for a new telephone service and cost loads and loads of money. He was 15 at the time. His parents had no idea. He took what he was hearing quite literally. So that's the downside, if you like, of being very single focused. We're very black and white and very literal. But when it comes to gender, I think that our gender and our sexuality is likely to be less influenced, if you like, by those social norms. Maybe this is one reason for the very high statistics on autism and gender dysphoria. And the statistics are high. Some of the research coming out of the Netherlands is saying things like 1 in 8 people on the spectrum will be living with gender variance, gender dysphoria. Others have it as high as 23%. And my own research that I'm currently involved in is closer to that 23% mark. And of course, we ask the question, well, why? And at the moment, we don't know why. And maybe some of the reasons why. As autistic people, authentic. This is what gender is. This is a definition. One's intersex or gender identity may be different to one's sexual orientation. They're quite different things. Gender dysphoria is biological, caused by the development of gender identity before birth. So this is not pathology. This is set. The condition is not a mental illness. Your biological sex is determined by chromosomes, but the biological sex are determined physically by the reproductive organs and genitals. Could be male, or the gender identity, which is determined by the brain, could be female. and vice versa. Now, I know I've had people say to me, it's not okay to talk about gender as a result of hormones. And maybe this is so. Maybe it's only culturally constructed. But I can't help thinking that some of the evidence shows that there's biology involved too. So when a fetus is developing in utero, around 7 weeks, and you can look this up in embryology on the internet if you want, around 7 weeks, there's a kind of hormonal wash that's to do with the physical development of a child. And at that age, the little buds that will become penis, testicles, or ovaries, uterus, and so on, they look identical. The brain is given an instruction via a hormone to start to differentiate, to become one or the other. And that's the physical development, and that's triggered according to XX chromosome or XY, male or female. Usually, it's a miracle that babies are born so intact. To be honest, so many stages of development happen as a fetus is developing. Anyway, a little bit later, the neurological system, which is to do with your brain, your nervous system, and so on, hormones wash over that as well. And usually those physical development and brain development are in line. But sometimes there's a mismatch. And this is what I think of as when dysphoria can occur. And then culturally growing up, when we add to those things, those things that are uncomfortable, we may not know the reason. And I think it took me more than 60 years to understand my tomboyish nature wasn't just because I was a tomboy girl. It was in fact because I didn't relate, and I'd never related to that female form. I tried really hard to do all the things girls are supposed to do. And if you're a tomboy, you're a girl, but you're just a tomboy girl. But it was never okay for me. But it took such a long time to find the language to describe what was happening for me. We'll talk more about this. Yeah, hopefully that makes sense. Gender awareness and concepts. Gender is often not well understood. Prejudices, belief systems tell us that the body, physical, dictates the gender. We need to be in tune with the individual that we're working with, loving, and this is going to mean putting aside your own agenda and working with that person. So we're going to need to do lots of observing, listening to, weighing things up. Is this person telling me they want to cut off their penis because of a sensory discomfort between their legs? Is it because they don't associate that part of their body with their identity and their gender? We really need to listen and watch. Please, please take us seriously. Suicide rates amongst autistic people, amongst gender dysphoric, the community of people living with gender dysphoria is up to 40%. It's one of the highest amongst any group of minority group, however you want to put it. It's best to do no harm. We need to find out what we can do to support a person to avoid them ending their lives. So recognizing signs and characteristics, just like we recognize the autism spectrum, we need to recognize individual gender and sexuality. Because gender is also a spectrum, it is not black and white. We only have 2 words in English, male and female, to represent gender. It's interesting, so many other countries have native Indians, for example. I'm sorry if I'm saying that wrong. Indigenous people of so many cultures, much more in touch with that broader understanding of the human spirit. Have 3-spirited people, for example, and that's perfectly normal and accepted. In our Western so-called civilized world, sometimes I don't think we're very civilized. We only have 2. The reality is quite different. There's a description of gender dysphoria in the DSM-5. This is the diagnostic manual, where we'll find a number of things illustrated or outlined so we know what to look for. when we're doing an assessment for things like autism, dyspraxia, dyslexia. We don't call them those anymore, specific learning disorder these days, and gender issues. So one of the things it says is that there has to have been a significant distress or impairment for at least 6 months. And that's not very long. And in the world of autism, we might be physically one age, 5, 15, 25, and older even, but emotionally and socially another. So we really need to think and observe and check out what's happening for this person. Believe and explore, absolutely. Put your own biases to one side, but explore thoroughly. We do have lots of sensory issues as autistic people. When someone is telling me about some of the sensory discomforts they might feel, I couldn't bear anybody, my wife in particular, as we were then a same-sex couple, to touch my breasts. I couldn't bear her being too close to my ears. These are sensory things, and I always associated that with a sensory issue, as in my senses are not coordinated well. I'm single-minded, so any sensory experience I have is going to be highlighted. Sounds are too loud, lights are too bright, touch is overwhelming, etc. And I live with that for all of my life. So I have to wear caps on my head sometimes. I've got my ICAN cap right here, so that I knew where I ended. I wear earplugs and earphones, ear defenders. I have a squeeze jacket that I can wear going through airports and places like this that will hug me, and it helps build a kind of barrier around to protect me. So how do I know whether what I'm feeling in my body is a gender issue, a sexuality issue, or a sensory issue? Really need to sift through this stuff. And because for all of those years I believed mine was only sensory, I didn't relate it to my sexuality or my gender. As soon as that penny dropped for me, and I realized, and I talked to other people who said, oh yeah, I live with gender dysphoria, I'm a trans guy, I was never comfortable with anybody touching my chest until I became the man that I am. And then that's quite different. And you can touch any part of my body, not you particularly, but my wife certainly can. And I don't have those sensory issues any longer. But it's taken me a very long time to work through those things. So please listen, but then explore with the young person or older person you're supporting to check through that checklist of issues that occur because of our autism. But listen to us. Don't be put off. Don't say, this person's autistic, they cannot know what's happening for them. Please don't say that. Therefore, gender dysphoria is a condition where a person experiences discomfort or distress because there is a mismatch between their biological sex and gender identity. Biological sex, assigned at birth, depending on the appearance of the genitals. That's a different concept to what's going on in our gender, which is a brain identity, if you like. Some of the findings from neuroimaging studies focusing on brain structures suggest that the brain phenotypes, just a technical term of trans women, for example, we call that male to female, and trans men, female to male, differ in various ways from control men and women. That means from the men and women who haven't transitioned into a different gender. They are typically born male and female, and they've stayed content with that gender. With feminine, masculine, demasculinized and defeminized features. That means that when you look at the brain of someone who's a trans person, the gender they are aligned with looks on their brain imaging just like other women or other men. And that's interesting. And I know we could argue what comes first, the chicken or the egg? You know, is that happening because they've transitioned and they are taking the right hormones now? I don't know the answer to that. I just think that this is a study of interest, and more studies like this are coming forward. As I said earlier, gender dysphoria and mental health means that over 40% of trans individuals living with gender dysphoria attempt suicide. And you can look these things up, and you can watch YouTube videos about people who have survived and have gone on to transition and are not suicidal anymore. But it is interesting that up until puberty, I think about 88% of young people may change their mind. After puberty, 99.1% don't change their mind. They know this is the gender they should be living in. So even more so, we should be listening to young people who are over that cusp of puberty. Now this can present a problem, of course, because once you move into puberty, if you're a boy, your voice changes and deepens, you get taller, you get hairier. It's hard to undo those things. My brother, who's 6 foot tall, if he would become a female, well, yes, there are females of 6 foot tall, but his disposition as a man, his manliness structures are pretty set, and it's very hard to undo that. So if you have a young person looking so male and they know they're really female, it's hard to go back. This is one of the reasons we use puberty blockers. One of the things I love about puberty blockers is it buys us time. It gives us time to help a young person to explore and discover who they feel comfortable being, as in their body, what gender they're at home with. And time is really good. We don't want our young people to be part of that 40%. There is some debate about the, what's the word? With the studies, they've used quite small samples. There's some debate as to whether they are robust enough. Robust is the word. Do they show a strong enough link to autism? Low power, because of small groups of studies not being robust enough, is one of those questions. And you can look these up yourself. One of the later studies that came out of Belgium, and I spent a bit of time with these researchers in Belgium earlier this year, they show that gender dysphoria is much more likely to impact autistic individuals than those in the non-autistic population. And there are more and more studies that are showing this. So again, this gives credence and credibility to the understanding that we need to listen to autistic individuals. And some are very young. I came across a young person who was only 3 years old, I think, who was saying they wanted their penis cut off. They were meant to be a girl, and they weren't physically looking like one, so they needed that to change. That's quite young, and unlike me, I never had any, I was not in touch with those things at all. My attention, very single focused, was taken over by the passions in other ways. I just kept people at bay. When I was a teenager going through menstruation, that was not happening to me. I would go around with blood on the back of my clothes, refusing to wear pads, and later on it was tampons. This wasn't happening to me. This was terrible. This wasn't who I was meant to be. I didn't have the language or the labels to describe what was happening. People just assumed, as I did, this was a sensory thing. I couldn't bear the smell, blah, blah, blah. It was interesting. When I actually transitioned into my now physical male identity, and not everybody does. Some people choose a social transition. They don't change things in their body at all. Finances are a big issue, resources, insurance companies not wanting to cover medical bills, and families not being prepared to travel and support somebody, not being prepared to travel in their journey to support this. This is, even my mum has said, I know you're a girl. I changed your nappies when you were a babe. My mum's 98 years old. Sometimes I want to drop my dacks, that's the Australian term for trousers, and say, but these are the genitals I have now, mum. I won't do that. I think the shock could kill her. Oh no, I shouldn't laugh about things like this. Anyway, so I don't show her, but I've gone for full physical transition because I needed everything that was female about me gone. Anyway, what am I saying? I think I'm trying to say I've lost it, I think. Never mind. It will come back, possibly. I deviated because I got a bit excited. Sorry about that. Special interest, passions, OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, or being single-minded. And it's a single-mindedness that we need to explore. A boy, for example, who loves soft material, plays only with girls, says things like, I like soft things. I play with dolls with long hair. I play with girls. Oh, I must be a girl. Another says, I love dresses and drawing. Girls wear dresses. I must be a girl. These are examples of single-minded thinking. They're not necessarily related to the idea of gender dysphoria, or ID, as in the personality, the identity of the belief that a person has. How do you separate those things? Well, this is part of a story. We need to be looking in on and watching the whole story. Every day, this young person, it's not just playing with girls, it's I want to be. Not just playing boys, I want to be. This is who I am. We need to hear these sorts of words. I don't know if you've come across Drew's Planet, but I love this. Drew says, I've recently been making exciting and very daunting discoveries about my gender. As a result, I currently identify as 30% George Clooney, 70% Georgina Clueless. I'm frantically researching the posh names for where I'm at, and I'm guessing that I'm non-binary, genderqueer, with a degree of gender fluidity. Essentially, I live on planet Drew, which has an erratic rotation around the gender system. We're currently quite close to Venus. I'm an adult fan of Lego, a sci-fi geek, Doctor Who fan, I'm with you there, and the occasional gamer. I've also discovered that I can do liquid eyeliner, which is, so you can see the discrepancy, you can feel the kind of tearing that's going on for Drew. And it's very hard for us to settle into an understanding of who we are. And for some of us, I remember watching a program, and the young lad on this program was like a boy Monday to Thursday and Friday to Sunday, very much a girl. Who knows whether that will continue? But what he's saying is that he is not he, they. And when it comes to pronouns, it's not just he and she anymore. It never has been, and everybody's a mixture. We've all got boy, girl in us, as in we've got male and female hormone, testosterone and estrogen. There'll be a hormone, absolutely. Girls have much more estrogen. Boys have the testosterone. We know that. But we're still a mix. And people have associated feminine ways with things like gentle patience, emotional instability, motherhood, feminine wiles, makeup, high-heeled shoes, and all these kinds of things. But that's not all girls, is it? A lot of females really don't necessarily demonstrate or has those kind of connections and understanding. And they thought of male as, muscly, strong, protective, I don't know, masculine is this connotation. And we split human nature into these categories, when really we're all a mix of both. And there are lots of effeminate men who are equally men, as there are the masculine women who are equally women. Then there are those of us who know, even with our bodies set when we're born, identified our cisgender at birth, we've come to understand we're the opposite. We're trans. That isn't the gender I'm at home with. In my mental capacity of connecting, this gender that I have been assigned isn't right for me. And some people are they as a ongoing situation. It's not either or, I'm both. The gender isn't binary. Binary is a word that means set. It's set in time, it's set in concrete, it's unchangeable. Gender is very changeable, and for some people that is on a regular basis. This is the person that you are living with and supporting. You need to take that on board. I'm sorry about my, I have a bit of a cold, I'm going to cough. I'll just mute this a little bit, so I don't blast you away. Hopefully, that will be the end of that. Okay, and then we need to understand that gender and our internal sense of identity might be different to our sexual orientation. I might upset people up here because I put gender and an intersexed brain, and it's probably the wrong term, but I have felt at times this confusion. I am both male and female, and although I am predominantly man, and I'm very happy to be, and since I've discovered this maleness, I'm very happy to identify as male, not they. But at times, that feminine stuff that I have grown up with, that culture that I've been socialized in growing up as a girl, I think has had an impact on how my brain works. And I say to my kids, because my children said, we don't need another father, and we don't want to call you dad. And I said, I'm happy about that because I'm your mum. I'm just a man mum. It seems a bit strange, but this is one of the reasons I've used that term. I feel a bit of a mix. Anyway, sexual orientation is again separate to gender. Gender dysphoria is biological, caused by that development of gender identity before birth. As I said before, the condition is not a mental illness. The biological sex is determined by chromosomes, but biological sex is determined physically by the reproductive organs, and genitals could be any of these things. I've said that before, but at the same time, I live with an understanding of my maleness, but I'm also a gentleman. I'm also very maternal in my outlook and in my interaction with other people. I like that about myself, but it could be different or difficult for some people. This is a bit of an image that we use sometimes explaining to young people about gender and sexuality. We put up this poster and we talk them through this understanding the genderbread man or person. Sorry about that, the genderbread person. Not everybody likes this poster, and that's okay. We just try and find a way of illustrating what's happening. And in autism, using some means to try to explain can be so important. It doesn't always have to be visual. There's a bit of a myth, I think, that as autistic people, we only think in pictures. It's not true. Some people very definitely do, but there are lots of us who are not visual at all. So we need to understand some people, visuals get in the way. You get kids in the classroom who are taking off the posters on the wall, who won't look at a visual timetable, who hate it because it actually interferes. And possibly these are individuals who need things spoken, recorded on an iPad, for example. And then there are other young people and older people who, no, don't show me, don't tell me. I need to do it to learn it. And that's a kind of kinesthetic learning style. They need to be on the move. These young people at school, for example, they need to be sitting on an exercise ball rather than a chair. They need to be given chores that they're learning on the go, etc. We come in all sorts and sizes. So this kind of image might not be the right one for the people you're supporting, and you might need to find a different way to express that. And you can get this kind of thing on a YouTube on an iPad that you can stop, go back and look at, look through a bit more, go back and look at again, over and over, which is very helpful to us. Gender dysphoria is not diagnosed if the symptoms can occur together with a physical or intersex condition, where there is mixed chromosomes and or mixed genitalia. Gender dysphoria is not the same as only liking to dress in opposite sex clothing. There's so much more to it. So we need to be aware of these things. There will be a brain-body discrepancy which we need to observe closely. We need to explore the research, get to know what is being said, what is being written. We need to be having lots of general conversations. Talking to our young people as soon as we're able to is so important, not necessarily about gender, but just to build that relationship that gives a sense of trust. You can trust me. We can explore this together. And then, of course, there's gut feeling. And as parents, you will have that gut feeling. Don't let anybody talk you out of it. Listen to it and explore with these other things in mind. But you need to let go of your prejudice. And this is difficult. If you come from a very evangelical or strict a society that says male and female is the way that we're designed. Yes, we are designed, male and female, but some of us are a mixture in more ways than one. Some of us in our physical body have a definite discrepancy with what's going on in our brain. And as you all know, the brain is this main drive. This is the engine that drives our body, and we need to understand and listen to it. Special interest in autism. Is there an apparent obsession with wishing they were a girl or a boy, opposite to their physical features? Is the story they give a life story, not just an obsession? Much harder to tell in autism than in typical development due to that single-minded disposition. And that's what we need to listen to. Have I taken over with this because of these reasons? Or is this a life story that is indicated in every aspect of my life? Please listen. Looking for separate interest that is gender biased is a clue. Wishing a young person were a girl, dressing in girls' clothes, wanting dolly, pram, etc. Not just wanting to wear dresses or stroke soft material. Parents need to watch for the clues, but we also need to make fully informed connections, going through all those areas that I said before, the sensory stuff, what perceptions we're having, understanding, single focused attention, listening to us. We're often very, very in tune with what's going on, even if we don't have the words for it. It's behavior that will give us away. Autism education means us as adults too. So we work hard to understand the autism spectrum. It's a very wide spectrum. It's different for different people. There isn't just one autism. Young people who don't use language need access to technology, keyboards, etc. So they can, in fact, relate, even without words. It might just be with images, pictures they've uploaded, photographs they've taken, tell a story. We can work hard to assist our kids to build social skills and propriety, not necessarily through social skills training. I have a dislike for those words. If you involve social skills training, for example, you're telling us the message I'm getting, which might not be the message you want me to get, is that I'm not okay, and that to be okay, I have to learn these things first. If you use an interest of mine, perhaps I'm good at chess, I like games, video games, or whatever it is. If you use that in a way to help me build social understanding, then you're not actually confronting me with an idea that I'm not okay. You're pointing these things out as we play together. Turn taking, yours and mine. I'm just picking some up off my desk. Now, this is actually my glasses case, but if you pretend, hopefully you can do pretend, if you pretend this was on teacher's desk at school, and I just fancied it because I liked how smooth it felt, and I picked it up, and maybe you say to me, can't have that. I have it. So I know you're lying. What you really mean is, that's not yours, because you took it. So, but if you use words like you can't have, you can't do, and I do have, and I am doing, then that single-minded reasoning that we live with as autistic people, I'm not going to get that wider understanding that you have. So you need to phrase things differently. Working hard to understand autism will mean how you consider the language you use. We work hard to develop appropriate values, knowledge, and beliefs. We must also check for any unwanted baggage that's clouding our thinking, preventing us from seeing that person as they really are, because it's smothered in the baggage that we're looking through. Our window is cloudy. We're not seeing through a lens that gives them clear access, or us clear access, to how to see that person. We're judging through other values that we've obtained that might be inappropriate. So you need to see that baggage so we can deal with it and let it go. So in conclusion, and this is an ongoing story, so it's hard to have a conclusion, typical gender, typical sexuality, there really is no such thing. There's human gender, there's human sexuality, and humans are incredibly diverse people. Learning to let go of prejudice and know an individual's personal disposition is critical. Teenage years, depression, suicide, mental illness are often linked to gender and sexuality issues. So we need to be aware of this, because prevention is better than cure. If you're dead, there is no cure. So this is a very serious thing that we need to be thinking and talking about seriously. My homepage has lots of information on and links to other resources. Sharing our own stories with each other gives perspective on issues of gender and sexuality. Perhaps things we thought were taboo were really our own fears, or were based on things we've believed forever because we'd never challenged it, we'd never thought about it. I've had people say some interesting things to me. Of course, God made you this way. You must be. You're going against what God made. And I say to them, I've had people say, if we were meant to fly, God would have given us wings, and yet we don't argue about going on an airplane. If you're born with, some whole villages are born with 6 fingers instead of 5 on each hand. Is that normal? It is for them. It is for them. So maybe we really need to reconsider what we thought of as being set in time. We only accept others as far as we first accept ourselves. And accepting self is often hard if you don't measure up to the images on the glossy magazines. If you're overweight, if you're too thin, if you're too tall, you're too short, you've got straight hair and you wish it was curly, they're minor things seemingly, but they really have big impact on how we feel about ourselves. So let's not try to fit in with some glossy magazine image. Let's not fit in with outdated beliefs and social concepts that have changed a long time ago. It wasn't that long ago, actually, when women were not allowed to vote. It wasn't that long ago when women didn't drive trucks and cars. It wasn't that long ago when men weren't allowed at the birth of their child. It's considered women's work only. Things have changed. We're much more in touch, and we need to continue to build that so that we can assist those people that we love and that we're sharing with. A page, lots more resources, and you'll have these as handouts, I'm sure. I love Finn the Invincible. I love his blog and videos that have documented his experience. And Dane, there's another one. I'm not sure if he's on here, but I can certainly give that to you. The story that he's traveled with as a person on the spectrum, and somebody I hugely admire through his gender dysphoric journey of coming to understand who he is. It's been amazing. Yep, that's an interesting video there. That's an interesting, because she's a woman who thought she was trans and then recognized that her associations were more to do with her sensory discomforts. Now, she outlines the video at the start by saying, maybe this is one of the reasons trans stuff is higher in the autistic community. I would reframe that. I think what she's describing are things that are pertinent to her. This is her personal journey, and it's something to consider, but I don't think we should generalize it because I think that will mean if we're not careful, we therefore don't listen to somebody's story. But listening to them will mean considering the things she's talking about. So watch this. Write down her 9 points. As an autistic person, she has her list, and wade through them, not discounting a person's story, but just lining it up to see what's what. I'm ending on this slide. I haven't got access to my clock. I forgot to bring it into the office. So I don't really know how long I've been, but I want to show you the book that my wife and I have written together, which is called Transitioning Together. It's the first book I've ever co-written with a person in my family. Most of the books I've written singly by myself, along with research, of course, but co-writing with Beatrice, who's also autistic. It's one of the most difficult things I've ever had to do, but it's a love story. And we've been together more than 34 years. She's had to transition too, because the things that happened because of my transition, which were very confronting. She thought she married a woman, and understanding she's now married to a man. We're not a lesbian couple, we're a heterosexual couple. And all those changes we've had to go through really have also confronted her identity. And not just as an autistic person, but her whole world was tipped upside down. Now we're committed to each other, that's not changed. And you can see the picture down on the bottom of the screen as me as mum to my 4 children. She was right there, right at the very beginning in many ways. Tim was only 2, well, he wasn't even 2 years old there. And Beatrice was 20. So we've been together a very long time. And actually married together for a very long time, even though we were together as friends. Right, all those years ago, it took a while for that relationship to develop. Anyway, I want to just recommend that book to anybody who's wanting to understand that journey as an adult, autistic adults, and becoming a trans person. So that's the end of my PowerPoint, and I believe I'm to invite you to ask questions.
The first question that we have here, and when did you start the transition?
61.
At 61. Okay. So it's been a 5-year journey. Okay.
Yeah.
So there's a question here about the having children. What is the best way to support them when they're very young? So you talked quite a bit about being supportive as kids get older and they can articulate it, and you touched a little on very, very young kids. So if you have a 2 or 3-year-old, what's a strategy you'd suggest, or what do you wish had been done for you?
I guess I wish I'd been listened to. I always played with boys' toys. I played with cars. I love mechanics and engines. I loved animals, still do, and birds in particular. Wearing boys' clothes. I was never drawn to anything frilly or girly. I wish my bedroom hadn't been painted the kind of colours that were chosen for me. I hated it. So I've always had an outlook, a disposition towards all things male that could have been listened to in a non-judgmental way. So you're not saying, okay, we'll raise you as a boy. We're saying, we hear you. You prefer blue, we'll go with that. You prefer boys' clothes, they're strong, they don't irritate, they're less prickly in lots of ways, we'll do that. You don't like the name Julie, we can go with Julian. That's quite close to Julianne. I don't know, there would be ways of adapting and having a generic kind of experience with the individual as they grow up. I think we get scared that if we go towards something that a young person is saying they're too young to know, and maybe we're just sealing their doom, or we're sealing their future. But if this is a disposition that's going to be ongoing, by the time they're going into puberty that could still change. All we're doing is saying, I hear you. This is what you like. We're going to build on that. We're not saying anything more. And then by the time puberty comes along, if they're still saying this, we take this quite seriously. And we're talking, you know, some kids move into puberty at the age of 9 or 8. I was 10. Others are 13 and 14. So by the time somebody is 7-ish, and then 8, they're still saying the same thing, it becomes quite a serious thing. We need to have them as part of a gender clinic under, as working with a psychiatrist, pediatrician, and a team of people who will support them and the whole family. So very small children, in my opinion, I would just be going with that generic disposition of agreeing. You don't need to disagree with them, without the fear that that we are doing something to set this in stone. We're just supporting the person. That's it, full stop.
Okay, well, we're almost out of time, but we have time for one more question, and I think this is a really helpful one. This person's asking, among all the readings and references that you shared in the slides, which one have you found is the best to articulate the high correlation between GD and ASD from a scientific perspective?
It's a little bit difficult. I watched I don't even know if I've alluded to it in the slides, but I watched a program on television, went into quite a lot of detail about embryology and what's happening in utero. And you can find that on YouTube. If you type embryology, gender dysphoria, etc. into YouTube, you probably will come up with this one. Otherwise, I can try and send a link to you, Denise. But I found that very helpful. I know that other people living with gender dysphoria haven't been pleased because they say it's not about hormones. And if you make it about hormones, they might start trying to find ways to stop this happening in utero. And I get what they're saying. But I believe we are a mixture, physiology and neurology and so on. So anything that supports, or as you look things up, supports that is a useful way. We're whole people. We're not just one or the other. And there are so many and more coming that it's hard to say, look up that one. I would check them all out and make your own mind up.